Powerful regimes have always feared enemies, but some feared memory itself. Killing a rival removed the person. Erasing the record tried to remove the idea that they had ever mattered. That meant changing monuments, records, portraits, books, and sometimes even the official story of the past. The technology changed across centuries, but the goal remained remarkably familiar. First, the person vanished from public life. Then the images vanished. Then the explanations changed. If the process worked, later generations might never know who had been removed. Some victims were rulers. Others had once stood only inches from the ruler at the center of power. The practice appears in very different societies, from pharaohs and emperors to modern one-party states. And the strangest part is that erasure often reveals exactly how important the missing person had once been. The first case begins with a woman who ruled Egypt as king and was later attacked in stone. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for roughly 2 decades and presented herself with the full symbols of kingship. Her monuments did not hide her authority. They advertised it across temples, statues, and inscriptions. Her stepson Thutmose III ruled alongside her before eventually governing alone. Then, years after Hatshepsut's death, a systematic attack on her royal image began. Her names were cut out of inscriptions with enough precision to show that the destruction was deliberate. Some of her statues were smashed, buried, or reused as building material. In some places, her image or titles were replaced by those of male kings. Later king lists could pass over her reign entirely, making the official succession look simpler than reality. The erasure was incomplete enough that modern Egyptologists could reconstruct much of what had happened. What makes the case unusual is that the campaign appears to have begun long after any immediate succession crisis. Whoever wanted to reduce her memory failed. The damage itself became evidence that she had once been powerful. The next pharaoh was attacked even more aggressively because he had tried to remake Egyptian religion itself. Akhenaten attempted one of ancient Egypt's most radical religious transformations. He elevated the Aten and challenged the traditional religious establishment, especially the cult of Amun. He even built a new capital, Akhenaten, designed around the new royal and religious order. After Akhenaten died, the state moved rapidly back toward the older religious system. Temples associated with his program were dismantled, and their blocks were reused in later construction. His names and images were attacked in a campaign that turned religious rejection into historical erasure. Later official king lists often omitted him and other rulers connected to the Amarna period. The regime he created became something later authorities wanted to condemn, not celebrate. His purpose-built capital was abandoned, helping bury the political world he had tried to create. Ironically, reused temple blocks helped modern scholars recover images meant to disappear. The attempt to erase him made the surviving fragments even more valuable because every scar pointed back to the controversy. Rome developed its own language for attacking memory, and one murdered prince became its most famous victim. Geta and Caracalla inherited the Roman Empire together after the death of their father, Septimius Severus. Their relationship quickly became poisonous, and the imperial court divided around the rivalry. In 211, Geta was killed during a meeting arranged in their mother's apartments. Caracalla now controlled the empire, but eliminating his brother physically was only the first step. Geta's name was removed from inscriptions across the empire. His face was also erased from images, including one famous painted imperial family portrait. Official imagery had to tell Romans that only one legitimate emperor remained. The result was often obvious: blank stone where a name should have been. That created a paradox. The destruction could make people wonder whose name had been attacked. Today, the erased face in the Severan Tondo is one of the clearest surviving examples of Roman memory sanctions. Caracalla tried to monopolize the past, but the violence done to Geta's memory preserved the story of their conflict. Another emperor would face memory destruction from the Senate itself. Domitian ruled Rome for 15 years and filled public space with the symbols of imperial authority. His relationship with the Senate became increasingly hostile. In 96, a palace conspiracy ended his reign. After his death, senators moved quickly against the public memory of the emperor they despised. Statues could be removed or destroyed, stripping his image from civic spaces. His name was erased from inscriptions, leaving visible scars in official monuments. Some portraits could even be recut, turning the face of a condemned ruler into someone politically safer. Public space was rewritten to suggest that the previous ruler no longer deserved commemoration. Written memory was harder to control, and hostile literary traditions helped shape how later generations remembered him. The state could attack stone and bronze, but it could not completely erase the historical record. Again, the absence became evidence. Someone had once stood there, and someone else wanted him removed. Modern regimes gained a new weapon against memory: photography. Leon Trotsky was once one of the most recognizable leaders of the Russian Revolution. He helped build and lead the Red Army during the Civil War, placing him near the center of Bolshevik power. After Lenin died, Trotsky lost the political struggle against Stalin. He was expelled from the Communist Party, exiled internally, and then forced out of the Soviet Union. Once abroad, Trotsky became not simply an opponent, but someone official history needed to diminish. Photographs could be cropped, retouched, or reproduced in versions that pushed him out of the visual story. Textbooks and propaganda increasingly centered Stalin while reducing Trotsky's earlier importance. The revolution was being retold so that one of its most famous organizers seemed peripheral. Outside the Soviet Union, however, Trotsky continued writing, organizing, and challenging Stalin's version of events. That made complete erasure impossible because alternative records survived beyond the regime's control. The more Soviet history was edited, the more later historians became interested in what had been removed. One Stalin-era official would become the literal textbook example of disappearing from a photograph. Nikolai Yezhov rose to extraordinary power as head of the Soviet secret police during the Great Terror. For a time, his name was closely associated with the machinery of repression. He seemed to be inside the most dangerous circle in the Soviet Union. Then Stalin's political machinery turned against him. He lost his position, was arrested, and disappeared from public life. The most famous symbol of his erasure came from a photograph. In later reproductions, Yezhov was removed so cleanly that the riverbank simply continued where he had stood. The regime was editing its own recent past almost as quickly as it created it. Unlike a damaged Roman inscription, photographic erasure could look natural unless someone possessed the earlier image. Once original copies resurfaced, the manipulation became impossible to deny. His disappearance became more famous than many of the propaganda images designed to celebrate him. Another Soviet official was removed so aggressively that some citizens were told to cut him out of an encyclopedia. Lavrentiy Beria became one of the most feared and powerful officials in Stalin's final years. As security chief and later a senior government figure, he possessed enormous institutional influence. When Stalin died in 1953, Beria briefly looked like one of the men best positioned to dominate the succession. Instead, his colleagues quickly concluded that he was too dangerous to leave in power. He was arrested, removed from leadership, and later executed after a closed political process. But the strange part came after his physical removal. Subscribers to the Great Soviet Encyclopedia received replacement material designed to remove his entry from the volume. Readers were effectively asked to edit the official reference work sitting inside their own homes. It was censorship transformed into a household task, yet surviving copies preserved the evidence of what had been changed. The attempt to erase him created one of the most literal examples of rewriting history page by page. In Mao's China, a designated successor would undergo a similarly abrupt transformation from hero to absence. Lin Biao rose so high in Mao's China that he was formally presented as Mao's chosen successor. His image appeared beside Mao in propaganda, ceremonies, and the political mythology of the Cultural Revolution. He was closely associated with the promotion of Mao's Little Red Book and with the People's Liberation Army. Then, in September 1971, the official story changed almost overnight. Lin died in a plane crash in Mongolia after an alleged failed plot and attempted flight from China. The man publicly presented as Mao's successor suddenly became a traitor in official accounts. Images that had once displayed political unity became embarrassing evidence of how quickly the line had changed. Textbooks, newspapers, and political education recast him from model revolutionary to enemy. As in the Soviet Union, older photographs made complete visual erasure difficult. Anyone who remembered the previous propaganda could see how dramatically official memory had reversed. The regime could change the official story, but it could not make millions of people forget what they had already seen. Across these cases, the methods changed, but the logic of erasure remained surprisingly consistent. Hatshepsut lost names in stone, Geta lost his face, Yezhov lost his place in a photograph. Different regimes used whatever tools their age made available. The purpose was rarely just revenge. It was control over who future generations would consider legitimate. Removing a rival from the past made the survivor look more natural, more important, and less challenged. But erasure has one fundamental weakness: traces survive. A scar in stone or an awkward gap in a photograph can become proof that someone tried to manipulate memory. And sometimes the attempt to erase a person is exactly what makes later generations search for them. The most complete way to control history would be to leave no evidence. Fortunately for us, regimes almost never succeed.